Welcome to American Dreams. I'm visiting here today with Steve Alder. Steve, welcome to today's program.
Thank you, Alan. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation to be on your show.
Well, I'm super excited to have you here, and I want to first, for the listeners, outline you had a very unique background and journey in life, your pathway, how you got to where you are today. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the things that have been in your path of life.
Yeah, thank you. It is a unique journey, and I think I've ended up in a pretty unique space. I started with a fairly traditional academic career, and that took place predominantly at the University of Utah, where I had a faculty appointment in the School of Medicine. I did things from biomedical research to heading the public health activities in the School of Medicine and running programs there. As part of that, I was engaged in international and global health and enjoyed that very much, but was frustrated that much of the work that we did, if we had a grant or we had some sort of support through philanthropic means, as soon as the money ran out, the program often ceased, and all the work that went into that was lost. So along the way, I was introduced to Bob and Lynette Gay. They've become dear friends, colleagues, and I've had the honor actually of working with them for now about a dozen years. But I was engaged with them in this concept they had, driven by Lynette to create capacity building in the health space in the West African country of Ghana. And her idea, with the support of Bob, was to put a public health higher education institution in place. So early on, I was involved in just helping with the concept and the setup of the structure. And over time, I became more and more involved. And at one point, we were in need of a leadership transition, and I stepped in as the interim president of the college. And that interim president role turned into a substantive president, and now I'm in my 8th year in that role. I've likewise kept ties with the University of Utah, and again, in partnership with not only the university, but with Bob and Lynette, we've launched a center there called the Center for Business Health and Prosperity. And between these two academic organizations, our goal is to figure out how we promote prosperity wherever it's needed, worldwide, and what that even means to have a prosperous life. So I have this great opportunity at this point in my career to work in the prosperity space, both from a how do we develop ideas and approaches the work to how do we get involved on the ground in helping people to find their pathway to prosperity?
You know, when we think about the concept of prosperity, how has this concept evolved over time?
As part of my journey, I had done my doctoral work at the University of Utah, and as we started to move into this prosperity space, my academic work transitioned from a medical environment to business. And so I was able to attend the University of Oxford, where late in my career, I did an MBA there. And as part of that, I became quite interested in some of the history of what Oxford brings to bear on things. And one of the things they've done well is if you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, it gives the history of words. And prosperity is a word that's been around in some form now for about 800 years. And the term has evolved. It's started around the idea of amassing resources, amassing wealth, and how could we bring wealth and use that wealth for our benefit. That in recent years has started to fade, and this idea that prosperity is living well. And living well has multiple dimensions to it. And so when we think about somebody having prosperity, it's that they are living a life that they have chosen that they are satisfied because they are achieving the things that are important, not only to them, the people around them, and to different priorities they feel that the world around them needs. This becomes a really interesting concept, as well as we think about the prosperity space. It becomes a very interesting way to approach well-being in the world, and how do we make the world a better place?
It's interesting that in the space that you're working, that there's been some involvement in your world of combining the Western education. I guess there's been a Self-Reliance Center put in the University of Utah, and that's collaborating with your center over in Africa. Are there? How does synergy come? You got two different cultures, environments. How do you find synergistic relationships between the two countries and in education systems?
That's a great question that I'm often asked. It's like, how do you reconcile this work in West Africa, this work in the U.S.? And during my career, I've had the opportunity to work around the world in virtually every continent. Antarctica, I've not had the chance to work there yet, and suspect I won't. But otherwise, we've looked at the idea of prosperity. We've looked at the idea of living well. It turns out that there are some interesting concepts, some interesting ideas, some interesting principles that transcend these geographic locations. So, for instance, as we take Ghana, which is a country that is truly, we talk about developing world, but sometimes those developing world countries are really stagnated and living an existence that's well below where they'd like to be. But Ghana is truly an example of a developing nation. They're moving through the ranks of their socioeconomic standing, going from low income to recently achieving low middle income. And as we look at some of the challenges Ghana faces, it turns out that while those challenges may look different in the United States, a lot of the core elements are the same when you start to drill behind the scenes. And so our ability to work in these separate environments and to go deep in Ghana as well as deep in the United States, we often find that solutions and opportunities in each location, those opportunities, those solutions are informed by what we're experiencing in the other location. As an example, we look at healthcare challenges in the United States. What are the challenges we face? Too expensive, hard to access. The outcomes are not necessarily what we'd like. When we're sick, we have to get ourselves up. We have to go somewhere else when we're at our worst to try and get care. Those are not so different than the ideas and issues that are occurring in Ghana. In Ghana, I live in a very rural community. I can't get to care because it costs so much, and so if I'm going to get care, it's a big undertaking. As an example, the resources they are hard to access, so it becomes expensive. So as we think about the solutions, solutions actually have some similar tenets as we look across the United States and Ghana. So it's become a very rich place for us, not only to think about and to develop knowledge in these areas, but to also get hands-on with solutions and have, the surprising thing for many people is have U.S. solutions that are informed by Ghana. We often think it goes the other way. Well, we're going to take what we do in the U.S., we're going to do it in Ghana, and that's going to help them get to be more like where we are. If I can, I'll give you a quick example. Our healthcare system in the United States is pretty tough to navigate at times, especially with complicated illnesses. And having somebody who you can relate to that helps you through that system becomes a game changer. And we did work here in the Salt Lake metropolitan area, where we worked with a team that developed health navigation for communities that were disconnected from the health system. That was shown to be remarkably beneficial. Now, where did we learn that? We learned that in Ghana. We learned that from approaches we took to addressing how to get community members who were not familiar with these systems through these systems. And it's this type of synergy. And now I gave one narrow example. There are many, many examples and things that we're working on that go back and forth between these two locations, yet through that, then also ripple out to other areas of the world.
Now, we've recently seen in our world the advancement of AI. And how does that, is there parity between AI in this country versus the African countries? I know technology may be at different levels, but as it advances, the world gets smaller, and I don't know how they respond to the advancements of technology there.
So when I first started working on the African continent, it was about 25 years ago. I recall when I called home, I would have to hike into the nearest, I don't think you could call it a city. It was too small to be a city. And I'd have to find somebody who would lease out or rent out phone time and make these complicated calls, never quite sure how much it was going to cost, never quite sure if I was going to connect. Now, virtually everybody across the continent has a smartphone. And we're seeing these developments in technology uptake, but also these leapfrogs where people who, let's say, didn't have a telephone because of the cell network that was put in with groups like CellTel, you could leapfrog landlines, and now everybody just went to smartphones, and the system continues to strengthen it. And so in my hand in Africa, I have terrific technology available, and the uptake has been great, especially among newer generations of adults. So having opportunities with these developments like AI, it becomes a great equalizer in the world. It allows things to happen in places like Ghana or other African countries, or you can think of other areas around the world that have similarly been behind in some of these areas, now becoming part of the global community. And that's what I think AI does. We hear a lot of the concerns about AI, but it's such a remarkable opportunity, and so many things that become affordable, accessible, and impactful through good application of AI.
What are the critical opportunities that enable people to improve their current conditions?
The one thing that we have everywhere in the world, and I believe it's our best resource, is people's capacity to do things. So much of the past development work and honestly, too much of the current development work that we're attempting is based on giving people stuff or doing things for people. That really undermines people's capacity to care for themselves and to create their abilities and have an impact that they can then work with others and help lift others as well. So I believe the greatest opportunities that are there are to take the capacity of the remarkable abilities across humanity and get them activated. We've had wonderful partners around the world. I'll again, because of my recent and deep work in Ghana, I'll talk about our Ghanaian partners. We're working with some of the best and brightest minds in the world in Ghana who have insights and expertise that the world truly needs to know about and needs to benefit from. So not only are they lending their abilities to the country of Ghana, but Ghana is now taking on the responsibility of contributing to well-being in the world. So there's something that's known as a dependency cycle that often starts when somebody is either given something or something is done for them. And the thinking goes a little bit like this. If I'm given something, and I'll tell you there's a caveat to this I'll come back around to, but if I'm given something, in the short term, that may seem terrific. But when you mentioned this idea of self-reliance, if we think about self-reliance, this is counter to self-reliance. So it may solve my immediate needs, but it's also given me this idea that I need somebody else to solve my problems for me. So rather than somebody working with me to solve my problems and to create opportunities and to develop, I now have gotten this subtle message that that's really not my pathway, that somebody else is going to help me. And I need to look for somebody else to take care of my needs. So if we can transition this thinking, if we can find ways to connect, and there are some beautiful ways to do this, and we're doing that here in the United States, we're doing it in Ghana. If you could just sit down with some of the folks we're working with and hear the stories about how their perspective of what was possible was so limited, but as they were given a hand up, not a hand out, they started to find there was a world that opened up to them. And they not only could start to transition their own situation, they could do this for their family, for their community, for others. And it creates what I like to think of as a prosperity movement, that people get engaged in this concept and idea, and they see it start to work in their lives. And all of a sudden, it starts to build, the synergies start to happen, and we start to see things change in a positive and dramatic way, recognizing that at the beginning, it can be very slow and seem like it's, I hate to use the term, but hopeless is often what people feel when they go into environments where they see stagnation. The caveat is, now in times of crisis, absolutely, that's a time for handout. That's a time for helping. But as soon as that crisis is abated, transitioning out of that is critical if we're wanting to do good for others, and frankly, if we want to be the recipients of that kind of good as well.
You know, there's a saying, I guess Jim Collins wrote in his book From Good to Great. You know, it's about finding not how do I do this, but who is needed,
right,
to enable me. So when you're building these who's and enabling people, because you have a culture that has done things a certain way, and now you're saying, look, let's make this self-reliant, let's change this culture. Are you bringing different people into teach and part of this solution, or what's this process?
Yeah, so I've been accused both in Ghana and in the U.S. of breaking with tradition in a lot of the work that we do, but it's just that idea. I think, Jim Collins' idea, if you got to have the right people on the bus, as he says, and having a team that is innovative and it is an element of entrepreneurship. It's taking the resources that are available and thinking about how we utilize those differently to have greater impact and do greater good. I'll go back to the wonderful opportunities I've had with Bob and Lynette Gay. Lynette, a humanitarian's humanitarian. Her charge to us is always, you've got to be doing things that help people now. You can't be doing academic work that sits on a shelf and someday maybe turn to something that will eventually do something. We have to help people now. The suffering and need is now. Bob's charge to us, and you've got to find ways of using what we have better and never let that go. We have to continually be evolving in our innovative approaches. And so getting people who think this way, not everybody naturally comes to it. And we've worked hard in our teams that span these two wonderful countries to get people who are willing to engage in innovative thinking. It means sometimes things don't work and sometimes we fail. But when we learn from that failure and turn that into a future better success, that's where the value comes from, being willing to launch out there and risk things. So those are the sorts of things we do. I will tell you, we haven't had a a 100% track record in being able to identify people. We find some people join us and it's not quite the right fit. And our goal is then to help them on to find places where they can be productive. But through a series of evolutions in this space, we've gathered together a remarkable team who the saying is they punch above their weight. These small but capable teams are doing remarkable things and have influence that goes well beyond what you might anticipate a group of that size has.
Are the groups on site in the country, or do they use technology to do Zoom calls, or what is the
all of the above? We love the idea that from an attempt by the world to respond to a pandemic, all of a sudden new ideas, technology that it's not new technology per se, but it's technology that we felt, no, you can't have a Zoom meeting when an in-person meeting is possible. You really need to have the in-person meeting. Now, Zoom type meetings don't, or other telecommunications don't necessarily replace in-person, but boy, they have opened up the opportunity for us to work globally in ways that we just didn't have, say, in 2019. It's been a remarkable transition, and I think one of the true benefits from the struggles we faced as a world in approaching the COVID-19 pandemic.
So, Steve, how does a person get involved? They're like, I want to help you in this cause. It's very noble, and this principle of self-reliance, I'm a believer. Is there a way that they can help?
Yeah,
in
that's
this
a great
cause?
question. I've always been a big believer in our train isn't for passengers. We want people who are going to get stuff done, and so whenever we've had people engage with us, we've asked them not to necessarily believe what we say, although we hope we're honorable in what we say, but we want them to come get involved. We want them to get hands-on, to be on the ground. And as we develop activities around the world, so somebody can come to Salt Lake City, Utah and see what we're doing. They can come to the country of Ghana, see what we're doing, but we want them to get engaged. We want them to hear from the people that we're working with to see what they have to say. That we don't want them to take our word, but we want them to be drawn to this calling of this type of work. And if I can say one additional thing about that, what I've found is often when people get into work like this, they may categorize it under philanthropic endeavors. We find that sometimes the principles like that they've used in other parts of their life. We have, for instance, very successful people in the business space. When they turn to philanthropy, they sort of say, well, those rules don't apply, and they sort of abandon those. And we see a lot of philanthropic undertakings that just don't go well. And what we've attempted to do is we've attempted to say, no, let's run our philanthropic undertakings as we would any business endeavor. Our goal at the least is to be a value-creating undertaking, that what we bring to the table is amplified in the creation of value. At best, can we create new markets of activity? If we follow the late Clayton Christensen's approach, can we create innovations in this space that are market creating, and therefore we are creating a ripple effect outward that goes well beyond what we're directly doing? Ensign Global College, for instance, our institution in Ghana, has been that type of an undertaking. The innovation was, how do you, instead of transporting these great minds out of Ghana around the world and recognizing that they get engaged in what they're doing when they go somewhere else and not coming back, how do we bring this standard of education to Ghana? And in doing so, this innovation has led to all sorts of additional enterprises, both in our local environment, but then beyond that. And this thinking of, well, how does this then start to transform the higher education space? And as that higher education space transforms, how does this start to hit other market sectors and other industries and other activities? And so I believe that if we do this well, our efforts become greater than we could even anticipate, as the concepts and ideas that are made real then become replicated and start to spread.
Thank you. Is there a website for more information a person can go visit?
We would love you to come to our website. If you go to www.ensign, which is ensign.edu.gh. That's our Ensign Global College website. My contact information is there. If people are interested, I would invite them to reach out. We have visitors come regularly, and they often leave a part of their heart with us as they stay part of, we call our Ensign Global College family our Ensonians. They become an Ensonian. We invite everybody who finds this at all interesting to come and join us in this Ensonian endeavor.
Steve, thank you for being with us today.
Alan, thank you so much for having me.